Welcome to the Thinking Legal podcast with me, David Kerner. This is a podcast about the human and psychological aspects of the legal sector. I run The Marketing Legal, a legal marketing agency, and you can find us at www.themarketinglegal.com. I hope you enjoy the show. So today I'm joined by Ronda Muir, the founder and principal of Law People Management, and she is a leading authority on the personal attributes of lawyers and the application of behavioral science to the legal workplace. It's great to have you on, Ronda.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. And I think to begin with, it would be really good to hear a bit about your background and how you first became interested in the intersection of emotional intelligence and law.
Well, in lower school, I was a debater and was always sort of expecting to go to law school. But in undergraduate, what we call undergraduate here, I majored in psychology, and part of my thinking, well, I would always was interested in it, but part of my thinking was that a lawyer should know things about psychology. And I went on to do graduate work, a few graduate courses at Harvard in the psychology department because I was expecting to get a graduate degree in psychology. But I decided that I wanted to go on to law school. At the time, the psychology model was what they call a medical model, where you diagnose people with problems. I wasn't so interested in that. I was more interested in what made for successful people and exactly what happened, like in jury rooms and that sort of thing, emotionally. So I went from those behavioral, psychological behavior classes to law school. And once I was in law school, I realized there were a lot of performance issues around lawyers that had psychological foundations to it. And when I started doing counseling for law firms and law departments, it was the psychology more than my law background that was very helpful. And that got me to write a book on using emotional intelligence for lawyers.
Yes, and your book is called Beyond Smart, and I think you said that a new issue of that is coming out late in the autumn. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I'm working on it right now.
Excellent. Now, I think to give us some background, maybe you could explain what emotional intelligence means in the context of the legal profession and why you think it's particularly important for lawyers and legal practitioners.
Well, emotional intelligence sort of has sort of a mass understanding, and then what it is as a theory, which is a little different. Emotional intelligence essentially means being able to make your emotions work for you instead of against you. And it's a hybrid word. It's emotions and intelligence, and that's really how it works physiologically too. That your amygdala, which is the source of some very basic and very quick emotional reactions, can be added to your cognitive abilities, sort of that prefrontal cortex part of your brain. And the two of them together are better than either of them alone. So it's a way to make emotions and your cognitive abilities work together. How did I get into that? Or how does that apply to law schools, law firms, lawyers generally? Yeah, so in doing my work in psychology, it became apparent that lawyers were not registering as high in emotional intelligence as other professions. And it's one of the few things because lawyers, outshine many professions in terms of the cognitive tests. Um, but, and there's not a ton of tests, but they're all pretty consistent that lawyers are sort of at average or a little below on emotional intelligence, whereas they're much higher, one or two standard deviations above the general population on things like IQ. So once you sort of know that, you see it in how lawyers perform vis-a-vis their clients and how they get along in their law firms, and also and or law departments, and also in how they feel, because emotional intelligence has a big impact on the level of stress or distress that person feels. And that lower emotional intelligence turns out to be very consistent with the fact that lawyers, at least in the studies done in the United States, are at very high risk for a number of emotional distress issues, like substance abuse or even suicide, but depression, that sort of thing. So there is, in my belief, a correlation between those two things: a lower level of emotional intelligence and then a higher level of distress. An inability to deal with some of the stresses that law practice imposes.
Yes, yeah, and law is by its very nature a very stressful profession, and I guess kind of one aspect of emotional intelligence and of law is that lawyers need to interact with clients. So how can emotional intelligence influence a lawyer's relationship with clients?
Yes, so that's an interesting and sort of wide topic, because in the past, clients often came to many law firms based on history, like traditionally, this is who we use as a company or as a family or something. But more and more, lawyers have to compete, and business development has become a hot topic amongst lawyers because they have to literally compete to get clients, and then they have to be able to keep them. And what we're finding is that it's the emotional connection with clients that makes clients feel like they have had good representation. And that's always a tricky thing, because sometimes you lose a case for a client, or a merger doesn't go through, or a tax finding goes the wrong way. But it doesn't always reflect on how good a lawyer is. They may have not had the best facts to deal with, and that they did well given that situation. But but most clients actually judge, and this we know, judge how good their lawyer was based on how connected they felt to that lawyer. So that emotional connection is very important in getting and keeping clients. And it's going to become even more important because, as we know, artificial intelligence is coming for a lot of legal jobs, or at least a part of a lot of legal jobs. And one thing that we still can outrun them clearly, those machines, is in that ability to have empathy and emotional support and understanding and that sort of thing. So it's really part of the lawyer's quiver of talents that they need to bring out when they're trying to get and keep clients.
And what kind of advice would you give lawyers to improve their emotional intelligence skills and enhance their relationships with clients?
Listening. Lawyers tend not to be great listeners, or they're listening for what they're looking for. Um, as someone said, lawyers, when someone else is speaking, the lawyer's just thinking the next thing they're going to say to impress the client. And actually listening to the client is important, and understanding what the goal is, because not all clients are coming to you because they want to really flop the other side, or they really want to go to battle. They may just need some instruction on what's going on, or some advice as to how to repair this relationship, if that's the problem. And most clients come to you in some level of distress. And, criminal clients can be in terrible distress. So listening to them, we know that just articulating your distress lowers your stress level. So having a lawyer who will listen to them, and actually respond to what they're saying, as opposed to what the lawyer would sort of like to know, is is very helpful.
And absolutely, I mean, listening is an incredibly important interpersonal skill, and broadening it out from just client relationships. I think it would be good now to talk about the broader impact of emotional intelligence on the kind of day-to-day operations and decision making in a legal environment. So, how does emotional intelligence impact the kind of day-to-day role of a lawyer aside from clients?
Yeah, so there's several ways. One is just in your own productivity and your own abilities. So it was decided early on that emotional intelligence improves your decision making. So the more emotionally intelligent you are, the better you are at some of the decision making, and even the artificial intelligence that's being developed is trying to include emotions and emotion recognition in order to produce better decisions by artificial intelligence. And that has an interesting story, if I can take a minute to tell. There was a scientist named Antonio Damasio, and he's written a very important book about the best decision making. And he's a neuroscientist. He had a client who became the client number one in the emotional intelligence field. His name was Elliot, and he was a lawyer upstate New York, a good corporate lawyer, fairly successful. But it turned out he had a tumor in his brain the size of an orange, and the surgeons said that they could take it out and he would be fine afterwards. And so they did a lot of testing and then took it out and then tested him again, and his vocabulary and his various cognitive abilities were all intact. But he was not able to perform at his job. His relationship with his wife fell apart. He ended up staying in the basement of his brother, and so he went to Damasio to find out what had happened. Since the test all showed that he had the same IQ, etc., that he used to have, and Damasio was able to show that he had lost some connections with his emotions. And because of that, he had become very impaired. He couldn't make decisions, which is something IQ doesn't really test. It was so it showed how much we rely on our past emotional experience that we've developed over a lifetime, that we avoid certain risks. We've learned what makes us feel guilty, what makes us feel angry, so that it helps us make decisions. And he couldn't make decisions. That was his problem. So that piece, that lawyer is really sort of one of the foundations of the theories around emotional intelligence. It was how important it was for him to perform his work. But it's also become very important as a way to maintain your health while you're practicing. And then it also is important to maintain good morale in a law firm or a law department in a group of lawyers working, because we have good data that the more emotionally intelligent the leaders of groups are, the more cohesive and high performing are those groups. So it has impacts on all areas of practice.
Yeah, and the story about Elliot is fascinating. I mean, I guess his decision making. I guess he was more risk averse. Or conversely, can low emotional intelligence make you more prone to risk as well?
Yes, that's a good point. Now, and lawyers are known to be risk averse. And there's several reasons for that, I think. Not only that sometimes that's the best route for a client, but if you have low emotional intelligence, it's very hard for you to recover from a setback. So lawyers are going to naturally not want any kind of setback, not just in their professional life, but in their personal and like practice life. That they're so lawyers are notorious for never not innovating, for example, and innovation requires risk. And if you have a lot of trouble recovering from a setback, if you don't, that's called resilience, which is a part of being emotionally intelligent. If you don't have that resilience, then you're not likely to take on something that might result in a setback.
And Can you give any examples from your own practice where higher emotional intelligence has benefited a legal team or impacted kind of case outcomes?
Litigation case, there's a lot of data on that, on litigation cases, because if the lawyers involved can't read the judge, the emotional cues, can't read the witnesses, or can't read the jury, and there's actually under a couple of different of the emotional intelligence assessments, there is a sub question that addresses your ability to read a room. So for litigators, reading a room, reading the emotional tone of a room is very important. And there's so many cases of that, and they're illustrated in my book too, where lawyers have talked about how their people skills in litigation end up being as important, if not more important, than the actual legal points being made.
I guess the next stage, and this is where you obviously come in as well to working with law firms. What are some kind of methods or programs that you would recommend to law schools or law firms kind of wishing to incorporate more emotional intelligence training?
Well, because of the distress, because of the high levels of depression and that sort of thing, law schools are starting to offer some efforts like counseling, even some classes on managing stress and that sort of thing. And some law schools have actually had appointed like deans of student support and that sort of thing. So that so the law schools are starting to make some progress. I mean, one of the problems is that law schools have faculty and administrators who are often lawyers, and we're not so sure what their emotional intelligence is either. So it's sort of a circle, chicken and egg thing there. If you don't have educators who are emotionally intelligent, then it's harder to get that sort of thing through as a priority in the school. But there is definitely Yale students made a big fuss and they got much better support. And stuff like there's some Texas law schools that have actually instituted programs that for first year lawyers that focus on the difference between cognitive intelligence and emotional intelligence. So that's being done at the law school level. At law firm levels, there's also sometimes a support. Like some law firms have been known to actually have psychiatrists that are or psychologists that are available for their lawyers to consult with, either come onto the firm or the department, or you can make an appointment with them. Some of them have now, which is really interesting, these apps. Um, and actually, the UK has a couple um, that I know law firms are using, where you can go on and schedule at almost any time, a half an hour or an hour, talk with a psychologist who will help you talk through the stress or that sort of thing. The other thing law firms can do is just recognize verbally how important people's emotional states are. I mean, they are so important that given some of the statistics we have, there's a lot of lawyers out there who are at risk of malpractice because of their personal situations. So law firms do well to keep a tab on that and try to help that, because otherwise, and they're at risk too if they're sending out people they know are impaired. So law firms are obligated to try to give support to their lawyers just from a financial liability standpoint.
Yeah, there's I guess there with any employer, there's an element of pastoral care that comes along with that. And in terms of challenges or resistance, are you aware of that there being a bit of resistance to introducing these initiatives from some firms in the kind of more traditional legal industry?
Well, there's always a pushback on what might be called soft skills because they're soft, and lawyers we're not soft. We're tough. So, but there's been also really good studies that, particularly around leaders, if you say you need an emotionally intelligent leader, which the data says is how you help raise the whole emotional intelligence of the organization is if you have emotionally intelligent leaders, that there's something called emotional contagion, which literally infuses the other lawyers or other people in the firm or practice with the attitudes and moods and that sort of thing of the leaders. So the leaders are very important. So the resistance often will come from the top, and who tend to be older people who usually agree on one hand that the people skills are very important, but are not sure it's something that needs to be talked about as like emotional intelligence or something. And there is pushback. There's something called SEL, social and emotional learning, that was developed by Yale for schools, and there has been a pushback on that. They've gotten, according to them, very good data on improving behavior and grades and that sort of thing by teaching social and emotional skills. But there's also been pushback that it makes kids too inner directed and too ruminating on their issues as opposed to being more outer directed. So I, it's never going to be a slam dunk when you talk to people about this. But we have very good data that the leaders who are most emotionally intelligent are not soft. They just take into consideration the emotional wins and the emotional reactions when they're doing something, and that will help make them more successful by doing that.
Huh. Yeah, absolutely. Now let's look to the future. You've already mentioned AI as one of the issues that is does have emotional intelligence implications. Over the next decade, how do you see the role of emotional intelligence and all of the field around that? How do you see that evolving in the legal sector?
Well, we're all aware of sort of the chat GPT stuff going on. And Elon Musk has said, I think it's by 26, it's within the next few years, that machines will be as smart as humans. Now, when he says as smart as humans, I don't know if he means that they will also have our emotional intelligence. That seems to be, I mean, the guy who's been Google's major uh, engineer, AI engineer, has said that the emotional intelligence piece has been the hardest for them to get down. So I certainly there's a huge march going on with AI, and we already have cases of AI judges. I don't know if we want to call those robots or machines, but AI judges deciding cases at a very similar rate as human judges. And I think there's like an 89% coincidence about how they agree on case matters. So you could imagine having an AI judge on particularly maybe workers' comp or some cases that occur frequently. And there's data that these AI programs are like much faster at reviewing documents and coming up with problems. And so there's one projection out that within, I don't know, a decade or so, that half of the work that lawyers do will be automated to some extent. It's already being, document review is being automated and stuff like that. So it's already being automated in a lot of ways, but they're actually predicting, loss of lawyers. The pushback on that is that what I said earlier is that clients, no matter how sophisticated the machines are, clients are still going to want some sort of personal connection, someone who walks them through the issues, reassures them, warns them in a personal human way. So these emotional intelligence skills will not become less important, they'll become more important. And that's what several Harvard Business Review articles say, is that, this is not this is not a skill that is going to become less important, it'll be more important.
Thank you, Rhonda. That's a nice place to end, and that was a really interesting conversation. And it was really good to hear your insights on emotional intelligence. And to reiterate, your book Beyond Smart, which you're currently revising, that's out at the end of autumn. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I mean, some of the biggest changes in the book, it's about 7 years old. Some of the biggest changes in the book have been around the impact of COVID and remote work and that sort of thing. And there are definitely emotional intelligence impacts and aspects of what has happened to the workplace since then. Higher stress, actually, more isolation, loneliness, that sort of thing. um, that has exacerbated the distress. So we talk a lot about COVID, about what that has done, and then of course AI and the march of AI.
Sounds really interesting. And if the listeners want to get in touch or read a bit more about you, where can they find you?
I'm at lawpeoplemanagement.com, or they can go to lawpeopleblog.com, which is my blog and also has tabs for my business and that sort of thing, and for the book.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it.